We are both big fans of light gun games here at My Life in Gaming. Simple arcade action with a fun controller that you don't get to use every day almost always makes for good times. Due to being included alongside Duck Hunt with so many console sets during the NES heyday, the Nintendo Zapper is perhaps the most iconic light gun of all time. And then you have the Super Scope. Nintendo's follow-up to the Zapper occupies a weird place among light guns. I mean, it's a wireless light gun in the form of a bazooka. Now that is awesome, and yet, whether due to the size of it or lack of interest in peripherals like this at the time it came out, it always feels like it's the butt of the joke among light guns. I mean, I never had one or even knew anyone who had one back in the day, and I only bought this one a few years ago. So while I think that surely most people in gaming know that the Super Scope exists, far fewer have direct experience with it, and well, I just want to use it and judge its games for myself. So let's take a good look at the Super Scope and all of the games that support it. By all accounts, the Super Scope was released first in North America in early 1992, less than a year after the console's Western debut. The box, which I trust didn't look nearly so shabby nearly 3 decades ago when the original owner must have bought it, came packaged with everything you would need to play Super Scope games, including a compatible game cartridge. 2 main components make up the core of the Super Scope system. The bazooka-shaped light gun itself, which is given the decidedly non-violent moniker of Super Scope Transmitter, and the Super Scope receiver. The receiver has a 6-foot-long cord that is plugged into controller port 2 and then placed on top of or at least near your TV, which of course must be a CRT television or other 15 kHz CRT like a PVM. The manual says to stand back 10 feet, but it works just fine for me at about 3.5 to 4 feet with a 19-inch screen. The receiver has nothing to do with aiming and is simply, well, an infrared receiver that conveys button commands and hit detection information to the console via the main gun's infrared transmitter, located just above the main lens. Wireless operation is made possible thanks to the power of 6 AA batteries. I'd always heard tales of the Super Scope draining batteries in an hour or two, but I popped in a fresh set of Energizer Max batteries when I started working on this episode, and I'd say I've used it for more like 6 or 7 hours thus far. The Super Scope's actual hit detection is based on tried and true methods of identifying CRT scan lines at the moment of firing to determine where bullets go. Although it is nice that it doesn't have to rely on full screen white flashes like the NES Zapper. I've always avoided infrared controllers, but I do have to admit, when set up properly, the Super Scope can feel quite responsive. Now, you might have noticed that in some shots thus far, you've seen a nice gray-colored receiver, and in others, a yellowed one typical of many SNES consoles. The reason? It's because I ended up buying 2 Super Scopes for some dumb reason. What dumb reason? Because the first one didn't come with this. It's called the sight assembly, and it's pretty hard to be accurate without it. You can slide it into the top left or top right grooves on the transmitter. I prefer looking through the sight with my right eye, although that's the opposite way from the kit on the box. If you don't wear glasses, you can lean all the way into the sight and get a clear view through the pinhead opening. But I found that the easiest way to accommodate my glasses is to simply wriggle loose the eyepiece for a wider opening to look through. It looks a bit less finished, but it gets the job done. But despite my own circumstances, having 2 Super Scopes is not actually useful, and that the system is not designed for using more than one at a time. Regardless, I'm pretty pleased with the Super Scope's functionality. Thanks to the sight, it's easier to strive for pinpoint accuracy compared to traditional light guns, and the wireless transmission works surprisingly well. But a light gun is only as fun as the games you can play with it, so let's scope them out! Let's start with the games that cannot be played without a Super Scope. The included game cartridge is simply titled Super Scope 6, a collection of mini games designed to showcase the Super Scope in a similar manner to how Nintendo later did with Wii Sports for the Wii Remote. But I can't help but wonder if Super Scope 6 had a detrimental effect. For one, touting the inclusion of 6 great games is a bit of an exaggeration in terms of both quantity and quality. While there are 6 game modes, the game's front end actually divides itself into 2 games with 3 modes each, Blastress and Laser Blazer. From there, you choose a mode of play, and they are all extremely limited in scope. Blastress A is basically Tetris turned on its side and you shoot holes in the falling blocks to make the shape you need. I don't know if Nintendo had Alexei Pajanov's blessing for this, but it'd have been pretty brazen if they didn't, don't you think? Blastress B flips gravity back to normal and you shoot the blocks to change their colors to create vertical, horizontal, or diagonal lines of 3 or more of the same color. Both modes are fine, but don't make a very compelling case for why you'd want a light gun. The third Blastress mode is not Blastress at all. It's basically whack-a-mole with a gun, which, well, that makes a lot more sense to me than Tetris with a gun. It's one of the better modes on offer. The other half of Super Scope 6, Laser Blazer, has a military theme. Intercept mode has you shooting down enemy rockets. Your own shots are also somewhat slow, so you have to judge how far in advance you need to fire depending on how far into the distance the rockets are. Engage, meanwhile, is probably my least favorite game mode. I'm not sure why you're firing a bazooka from a military aircraft, but this mode is ugly, has no music during gameplay, and is just not very, engaging to me. The final mode is Confront, which is somewhat similar to Intercept, except you're shooting robots as they draw nearer to your point of view. It's not bad at all, but there's not much to it either. I wish Nintendo had put their resources into making one awesome game rather than 6 tech demos of dubious value. Let's hope that at least a few other Super Scope games make a stronger impression. Battle Clash is one of the better-known standalone Super Scope titles, or at least it was better known to me since it was featured on the back of my console box. It's a first-person, one-on-one mech combat game developed by Intelligent Systems and Nintendo R&D 1, in which you play as the gunner of the ST Falcon alongside a pilot named Mike who's out to avenge his father in a dystopian sci-fi future. And it's good. Battle Clash supports the Super Scope's built-in turbo function, which helps a lot as you fire rapid shots to shoot down enemy bullets. However, your pea shooter does little to actually reduce the enemy life bar in most battles. By releasing the fire button, your gun charges up a big shot, which can deal heavy damage if you hit an enemy with it when they're vulnerable, often while charging an attack of their own or through gaps in their armor, which you can also gradually destroy. This is the right way to do charge shots, none of that button-holding nonsense. This game does a really good job of highlighting the satisfaction of precision aiming with the Super Scope, especially when you make successful shots through tight gaps in enemy armor. Battle Clash received a direct sequel called Metal Combat: Falcon's Revenge. It is very much more of the same, but the team's increased experience developing for the Super Nintendo resulted in more visually elaborate battle scenarios with better art, animation, and sound. The biggest difference from Battle Clash is that your charge shot can go up 3 levels to a so-called treble energy bolt. So you have to weigh whether you need to defend yourself before reaching the maximum charge, or whether you'll miss your opening by waiting too long. You'll also acquire a wider variety of sub-items compared to Battle Clash, and you can even choose a loadout from your available inventory before each fight. Battle Clash has a lame take turns for the high score 2-player mode, while Metal Combat has a pretty interesting versus mode where a player with a controller can control the enemy mechs from the main game. It seems like it could be a lot of fun if you understood how to play these characters, but I'd need a lot of practice, I think. I managed to finish Battle Clash in well under an hour, while Metal Combat took me a bit more. Both games are only moderately challenging with seemingly infinite continues, but Metal Clash has multiple endings and both games reveal codes for a hard mode after the credits, neither of which I've taken on yet. The short length was probably a big mark against these games back in the day, but today I'm old and short games are great. And while the Super Scope itself is not as affordable as it was when my dumb self bought 2 of them a few years ago, both of these games are still really cheap Super Nintendo cartridges. And how often can you say that these days? They're not going to change your life or anything, but they're fun arcade action games with cool mechs that are a bit different from Nintendo's typical first-party fare. So I'd say both Battle Clash and Metal Combat are absolutely must-plays among Super Scope games. If the Super Scope can give us Tetris with a gun, why not Mario with a gun? That's the idea behind Yoshi Safari, which is likely the best known Super Scope game on account of it being, well, a Mario game. I always kind of wanted to play Yoshi Safari when I was younger because screenshots showed it featuring the 7 Koopalings, who have long been among my favorite Mario nemesis. And unlike Mario 3 and Super Mario World, Larry, Ludwig, Lemmy, and Iggy actually have their proper hair colors as depicted in their artwork. Yes, these concerns do occupy some space in my brain attic. Another popular bit of trivia is that this game represents the first time Princess Peach's English name matched her Japanese name of Peach, as opposed to Toadstool, a change that more solidly took hold in the N64 era. The Japanese title is Yoshi's Road Hunting, which is a super accurate description of what you do in the game. The levels are flat rotating Mode 7 roads, and Yoshi automatically moves forward through the paths, essentially making this an on-rails first-person shooter. Although occasionally you'll need to press the cursor button to make Yoshi jump over gaps. Otherwise, in single-player mode, you really don't need to worry much about what Yoshi does, but a 2-player mode does allow a player with a controller to make Yoshi turn, duck, and jump. It's not too useful while running around, but it becomes somewhat fun in boss or even mini-boss battles to help dodge shots. Sometimes you'll come across a gate on the path and you can choose to proceed down the default path or shoot the gate to see what's the other way, but ultimately it doesn't matter much, although one way might be longer, shorter, avoid a mini-boss, or have more items to collect. I'd have probably died at least once if not for a recovery mushroom in reserve, but aside from only about 1 or 2 close-ish calls, the game is really easy and I never died on my first playthrough. But just like with Battle Clash and Metal Combat, you spend a lot of time in boss battles destroying parts of the enemy vehicle and shooting down their bullets before they hit you. The only thing you really need to watch for a bit is to ease off of the fire button every now and then, or else your shots will get really slow as the power meter drains. I generally found that playing this game was a lot more relaxing than, say, Battle Clash, because it doesn't demand so much accuracy, and as such I could keep both of my eyes open most of the time and only really focus through the scope when needed. Yoshi Safari took me just about 50 minutes to finish, but there is a hard mode if you'd like to get more out of it. The lack of credits and somewhat off-brand character sprites brought to mind that this might be a Tosei-developed game, and Moby Games seems to agree, although I don't know if there is any definitive confirmation on this. And I have nothing against Tosei games, mind you, but they often do have a good yet disposable quality to them, which is Yoshi Safari in a nutshell. Or in a Yoshi egg, I guess. A handful of third-party publishers humored Nintendo with some token support for the Super Scope, but only a couple of them are designed exclusively for the Super Scope. First up, we have Bandai invoking the design of the Super Scope itself with the title of Bazooka Blitzkrieg. This is just about as everyday of a gallery shooter as they come. It's mostly pretty boring, but it's mostly not bad either. The only thing that's kind of bad about it to me is that you don't have much of any way to defend yourself aside from get them before they get you. While some enemies shoot rockets that you can shoot down, most fire machine guns, and those will just drain your health as long as they're still standing and there's nothing you can do about it until you've destroyed them. It took me a few tries to even figure out how to survive the first boss, because if you don't destroy its machine guns as fast as humanly possible, then you'll be toast in seconds. After the first level, the game starts to look a bit more visually interesting, but it has perhaps the flattest and most boring color palette I've ever seen in a 16-bit game. It's a really short game of only 5 levels with infinite continues and I believe 1 checkpoint per level. It actually tends to be slightly more expensive than the Nintendo-published Super Scope games, so I don't know if it's good enough to buy, but it's at least worth checking out via a flashcard or something. Up next, we have Kemco presenting X-Zone. I didn't expect to spend much time with this one, but consider my expectations upended. Extra! Extermination Zone! Expect massive resistance! This game is so consistent with its X language and X imagery, to the point that the X compound that you're infiltrating is shaped like an X. And the Japanese and English ROMs appear to be identical, which means this isn't some sort of extreme localization. Some dude at Kemco had a cohesive creative vision, dang it, and I kinda love it. And you know what? It's fun! This is the kind of game Nintendo should have made instead of wasting their time with Super Scope 6. The action is relentless and the levels are challenging, but every time I died, I felt I could do better. By holding the fire button, you shoot fast shots that can damage enemies and take down missiles like many other Super Scope games, while holding the cursor button to lock on and then tapping fire can destroy certain enemies more effectively with a powerful blast. It's uncomplicated, but enjoyable for what it's trying to do. This one does have limited continues, and I only managed to get up to the boss of level 3-2 on my first run on the middle difficulty. But the game appears to only go up to 4-2, so I wasn't all that far off from finishing. However, at this point, I was contemplating whether there might be a workaround for one critical quirk. You see, every Super Scope game I'd played up to this point prompts you to calibrate and allows you to do so again while the game is paused if you feel the need. X-Zone seems to have no such thing, and as such, looking through the scope is relatively useless since your bullets don't land where it looks like they should. Nonetheless, I still feel like I can aim well enough to have fun, especially since there's unlimited ammo and I can see where I'm painting the bullets. Really, that indirect sort of aiming kind of made me think of a Wii remote. This train of thought led me to a YouTube video by Lou's Retro Source that explains how to sync a Wii remote to Bluetooth on a Mr. FPGA console. Really simple actually. The host then explains how to configure each console core to use a light gun, including the Super Nintendo. And it works! However, you might notice that in X-Zone, the red cursor is still misaligned to where the bullets go. If we go back to a game that has proper Super Scope calibration like Bazooka Blitzkrieg, we can see that this is no problem at all. The cursor marks where the bullets go. So for X-Zone, I went back into the Mister's SNES core menu and set the crosshair to none, which somewhat helps with the disconnect of it not matching where the bullets go in this game. But that said, I actually did play much worse this way, and it tired out my wrist pretty quickly. But ultimately, I've liked what I've played of X-Zone well enough that I felt motivated to buy a cart. It's pretty cheap, and I'd really like to make a go at finishing it. I think it is easily one of the most fun Super Scope games, even in spite of the aiming issue. Up next are the games that feature complete Super Scope support, but also allow for other means of input. Tin Star is a Nintendo-published title by Software Creations, the same studio behind Clock, which is a game that I know a lot of people love. Tin Star is themed after the American Wild West, except the characters are all robots. They look kind of fleshy to me though, with super exaggerated, extremely 90s cartoon faces and bodies vaguely along the lines of The Tick or something, which Software Creations also did the game based on that, for what it's worth. Or not worth. Tin Star takes the form of a series of vignettes over the course of the titular Tin Star's first week as sheriff in East Driftwood. Gameplay styles vary from scenes where TinStar himself automatically walks around the stage and you show him where to fire, first-person gallery shootouts, side-scrolling hover horse riding, and quick-draw showdowns. All of these modes work with a standard controller, SNES mouse, and of course, the Super Scope. But I never settled into feeling totally comfortable playing with the Super Scope in this one. It's one of the few Super Scope games that does not work with the turbo switch, which makes sense given that TinStar uses a revolver, but sometimes it feels unresponsive because he can't always shoot when you press fire depending on what he's doing in the scene. This and several other games with optional Super Scope compatibility look much brighter and a bit washed out when the Super Scope is in use, presumably to make it easier for the gun to detect each scan line, but I switched between the Super Scope and the mouse several times over the course of my playthrough, with the horseback and quick draw stages being the only modes that I thought the Super Scope worked well enough on. Specifically, I'm playing with the Hyperkin optical mouse, which is easily the best product Hyperkin has ever made, and on the whole, I'd say it's the best method of input for most scenarios in this game. At first, it might seem like one of the more elaborate Super Scope compatible games since it does have a battery for keeping saved games, but environments, bosses, and general scenarios are recycled a ton over the course of the game. I was optimistic that this one was going to be pretty decent, but it was just not to my liking at all. Operation Thunderbolt is a 1988 Taito arcade game which is itself the sequel to Operation Wolf. It was ported to Super Nintendo many years later, around the time Operation Wolf 3 went to arcades actually.
Operation Thunderbolt.
And the result is mostly pretty faithful, but also not great. There was at least an attempt to mix things up with a selection of playable characters who use different guns, and by allowing you to choose the order of the first 3 missions. 5 of the game's 8 stages feature Z-axis scaling motion, and it just looks abysmally choppy in comparison to the arcade version, which you can see on the right here on the Taito Legends Collection for PlayStation 2. And then 2 of the 3 horizontally scrolling stages have you rescuing hostages that act like they're trying so hard to be shot. They don't behave ideally on the arcade version either, but they hang around for a much shorter duration. Neither version of the game has music during gameplay, which is fine in a noisy arcade, but in my opinion, it's just a real damper on the home experience. Sorry, but I'm showing a lot of clips of playing with the Hyperkin mouse instead of the Super Scope. I had no trouble getting nearly to the end of the game on my first attempt with the mouse, and I dare say I think I actually had fun in spite of this port's shortcomings. While there thankfully is aim calibration in the options menu for the Super Scope, you kinda just drag the cursor around the screen and it does not feel as responsive as most Super Scope games. Holding the cursor button is actually what shoots your main gun in this game, while the fire button uses your rockets. Playing with the D-pad on a standard controller is a poor experience, but honestly, not much worse than the Super Scope. So this version of Operation Thunderbolt is a big miss in almost every regard, but is perfectly playable enough with a good mouse at least. Unless you just gotta have the complete set, you should definitely skip picking up this cart because it is by far the priciest Super Scope compatible game. I don't have much experience with Midway's Terminator 2 arcade game, and while I understand it has quite the reputation as a quarter muncher, I'm sure it is quite beloved in some circles. Like several other arcade shooters, it's actually not a light gun game. The cursor moves based on potentiometers in the gun grip. So in some sense, it's interesting that the home port titled T2 the Arcade Game does have light gun support. When playing with the Super Scope, the visuals switch to a wacky blue and pink color scheme that is surely way overcompensating for how visible it needs to be for the Super Scope to actually see, but the game is usually pretty dark when played with a controller or mouse. And I'll just say straight away that the Super Scope is maybe the worst way to play. You can't calibrate the scope position, and you basically drag the cursor around as you hold the cursor button, which also fires your main gun. The mouse plays fine, I guess, but believe it or not, I think it's the standard controller that works best for me. There was definitely a bit of thought that went into how the cursor accelerates while holding the D-pad so that it's easy to move quickly around the screen, but it's also not overly touchy when tracking slow-moving enemies. But the first level in particular is so long and boring, like 8 minutes of just the same stuff over and over. I never got past stage 3 when using any control method in which you have to protect future John Connor in a pickup truck that takes damage way too easily. Sorry to anyone who might have a soft spot for this game, but it is just not doing it for me.
Excellent.
A handful of games that are mostly played with a controller or mouse also have some extremely limited Super Scope support. For instance, if you boot up Lamborghini American Challenge with a Super Scope receiver in port 2, then the title screen will ask you to shoot screen instead. This boots up a streamlined game mode where you play through 9 races in which you can shoot at your competitors and any other cars on the road. And indeed, as long as your Super Scope is in turbo mode, your car will automatically drive when holding the fire button, and, well, you just fire away. There's even a sight calibration feature, thank goodness. You can also choose to have the car turn corners by following the Super Scope sight, which works way better than it has any right to. Or you can even have a second player control the car with a controller or SNES mouse. The mouse control in particular was kind of a revelation to me when I tried the main game. It feels amazing to play actually, and I liked what I'd seen via my flashcard enough that I went to buy a copy on eBay, even though it's a tad pricier than I'd normally spend on a car game. But I'm really in it for the mouse feature. The Super Scope mode gets boring pretty quickly, but it only takes about 20 minutes to finish. But you know, I feel like it exists for no reason other than that the devs thought it would be kind of funny, and I can definitely respect that. The Hunt for Red October may as well not even have Super Scope support, but it does. The main side-scrolling gameplay has to be played with a controller, but when you find the bonus games, you can take them on with some extremely inaccurate Super Scope shots if you like. Perhaps this should have just been an Easter egg instead of an advertised feature, as was done by DMA Design for the SNES version of Lemmings 2: The Tribes. While playing the game with a mouse or controller, if a Super Scope receiver is in port 2, you can drag the cursor, aim, fire, and destroy lemmings, leaving craters in the wake of your destruction. This game is actually a great demonstration of why Super Scope games tend to use such bright colors. The cursor movement was very spotty on my PVM until I dialed up the brightness. Now, I've struggled to find sources to verify this, but my impression is that the Lemmings 2 Super Scope support was only just discovered, or at least made widely known, not all that many years ago. It's not very useful, but it doesn't need to be since it's not an advertised feature and just exists because someone thought it would be silly to put in there and see if anyone would even think to try it. As far as I know, these are all of the known games with Super Scope support, but as the Lemmings 2 situation proves, who knows? According to Modern Vintage Gamer, the source code for the Super Nintendo version of Doom has references to the Super Scope, but there doesn't actually seem to be a way to use it in the released game. There also is another light gun game for the SNES, Lethal Enforcers, but that uses the Konami Justifier instead. And as I showed with the Wii Remote on Mister, you can get creative with software emulators to use a mouse or even head tracking to replicate light guns. And since a lot of the games seem to play better with the SNES mouse when it's an option, this sort of thing is definitely not a bad idea. Honestly, more of the Super Scope games have been decent to good than I was expecting. So at the very least, no matter how you manage to rig up a way to play these games, you should definitely check out Battle Clash, Metal Combat, X-Zone, I suppose Yoshi's Safari, and even Lamborghini just for the laughs. It's not as killer of a selection as what you can play with gun cons on PlayStation 1 or 2, but the Super Scope was a bit of a light gun blind spot for me, and so this has definitely been a fun experience learning about a set of games that we all know exists, but have rarely paid much attention to. So regardless of whether you intend to ever try the Super Scope or any of these games yourself, I hope you've enjoyed seeing what it's all about.
This episode of My Life in Gaming was sponsored by Noom. Noom presents a different way to get healthy and achieve your goals using proven psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy practices. Head over to noom.com/MLIG to take your free 30-second quiz and see if the program might work for you. So it's no secret that I've always struggled with my weight. I've fluctuated throughout my entire life during periods of comfort, happiness, and stress. Heck, if you watched this channel since the early days, then you've seen me change in real time. Anyone who has struggled with their weight has heard countless times before that real progress happens through lifestyle changes. These sorts of things take time, and Noom helps facilitate change by using techniques that make you more aware of how you're treating your body. When life started to get tougher in early 2020, both my wife and I suddenly found that we've developed or fallen back into bad habits without even knowing it. She joined Noom based on a coworker's recommendation of fall of 2020 and had great success with it. Her success inspired me, so I joined last December and I've been using it ever since. From logging food and water intake, seeing how much exercise or steps I was getting in, or just reading daily lessons, it only took around 10 minutes of my day. I usually fit it in when I was having my morning coffee. I really appreciated how Noom accommodated itself to my schedule without making me feel bad or if I had a bad week or a bad day. I certainly had plenty of those, and gentle nudges from my assigned personal coach has helped immensely when picking myself back up again. Head over to noom.com/MLIG to take a free 30-second quiz and see if Noom could work for you.